1,200 years ago, the Vikings explode out of the cold North Sea, like beasts unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. They come from a land of deep-water fjords, hardscrabble farms, and bitter clan rivalries. Today, it is called Scandinavia. It is the late 700s in the uplands of Norway. At the dawn of the Viking Age, the family farm is the basic economic unit of Norse life. As farmers and herdsmen, they plant grains and vegetables during the short growing seasons, and they rely heavily on livestock. Peace in the Northland is coming to an end. The expanding Viking population is increasing the demand for fertile farmland. Tensions boil over. Inevitably, violence flares between the Viking clans as the stronger attack the weak. The raiders fall on the farmers with axes and swords, and brutal violence. A land feud erupts with utter lawlessness. With land and wealth in short supply in the Northland, some Vikings set aside their differences and prepare to seek their fortunes elsewhere. The hands and tools that once shaped the crossbeams of barns are now put to another task. Along the shores of the northern inlets, something is taking shape, something that will change the lives of these people. A Viking longship. In the longship, Vikings draw on ages of boat-building techniques and seafaring skills.
There would have been no Vikings without the Viking ship. And it is that evolution of that technology that allowed them to make such a mark on history. In time, they learned to make boats that were seaworthy enough to travel the North Atlantic.
Each Norse village acts independently. Each declares its own king. The Vikings band together on this bold mission, leaving women and children behind and taking to the seas. They're after plunder, so they arm themselves accordingly. Among the first victims of their raiding are the monks of Lindisfarne, along the coast of England in June 793, home to St. Cuthbert's Monastery. Lindisfarne is one of the holiest places in the British Isles, rich with piety and with more tangible treasures.
These monks their bells are ringing, they're going to mass, and up out of the sea come these dragons. And the Vikings came on them just like a storm and cut them down, carried off everything, and burned the place.
The monks were met by hell.
The monasteries along the coast particularly appeal to the Vikings because of their great accumulation of wealth and the passivity of the monks. History marks this blasphemous attack on these monks and their treasures in 793 as a milestone, the first major Viking sea raid. But Lindisfarne and the other vulnerable monasteries along the coast of the British Isles are only the beginning. As the 8th century draws to a close, the Viking raiders set their sights on larger prizes. It's now the middle of the 9th century, only 50 years or so since Lindisfarne. Word of Europe's removable wealth has spread. Norse families, villages, and whole communities band together to build longships. They plan to improve their station at the expense of the unwitting people across the sea. One of the first major river attacks comes in 845 AD at the hands of a notorious Viking leader named Ragnar, a Dane. With a fleet of 120 ships, he seizes upon the legacy of Lindisfarne with a vengeance. His highway to battle, the Seine. His target, Paris. The King of France, Charles the Bald, pays Ragnar nearly 6 tons of silver and gold bullion so the raiders would leave and never come back. It has the opposite effect. As word spreads that such loot and tribute can be had, that land and goods are everywhere, the pillaging of Northern Europe and the continent continues with fervor. Between 790 and 1100 AD, Vikings follow every major river and water route into the heart of the continent. For the Vikings, a new world awaits. Norwegians write perhaps the most colorful chapter in Viking history as fearless explorers as they colonize Iceland, Greenland, and beyond. With the colonization of Greenland comes the story of 2 legendary Norwegian Vikings, Eric the Red and his son Leif Erikson. In the late 900s, Eric leads an expedition here and becomes the first to settle this unforgiving land. A fiery character, Eric is soon banished for 3 years from Iceland as well. He sails west and settles on the east coast of Greenland.
And so he begins to advertise this land, and he can't very well say, by the way, we only have a little bit of coastline that is at all habitable. So he goes over and says, we've got Greenland. It's covered in green. Some of them undoubtedly come, see what it is really like, and go home. But a lot of very strong and stalwart and hardy Vikings stay, and they have a life that is very harsh. The ground wasn't very tillable, but fishing was available, and other meat was available. But it was a harsh land.
During Eric the Red's leadership, a Norse agrarian society scratches a living in this distant land. From this community of free men comes Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson. Like his father, he yearns to explore. In the year 1000, he sets sail. By following the rumors of an unknown land to the west, Leif Erikson discovers a new world.
This is a fascinating thing and still very controversial in a way. I personally believe that America was discovered by the Vikings in or about the year 1000. Leif Erikson's village in Newfoundland has been carbon dated, for example, precisely to the year 1000 AD. So we know that Vikings were at least in Newfoundland and probably farther to the south than that.
The Greenlanders' attempt to settle here fail. It's estimated the Newfoundland colony lasts only a decade. And yet, 500 years before Columbus would make his epic journey, Vikings link the eastern and western hemisphere. After wintering in Newfoundland, Leif Erikson returns to Greenland. He introduces something new to the island settlers. With the same tools that build the longships, they build the rugged crosses of a new religion.
They decided that they would convert. Leif Erikson went to Norway, where the king asked him specifically to take Christianity to Greenland and to Christianize Greenland colonies, which he dutifully did.
As Viking influence spreads, the wider world shapes the Vikings. Their leaders see Christianity as a means to unite the Vikings, and ultimately to wield more control over them. At the dawn of the 11th century, 200 years after the attack at Lindisfarne, the Norse people still have no single king and little sense of solidarity. So it is Christianity that presents a reason to unite.
Essentially, Europe's history changes. Russia is now Russia, land of the Vikings. The Rus were Vikings. Normandy is now land of the Normans. The Normans were Vikings. Ultimately, the Normans would conquer England. And so their legacy is extensive in the history of Europe.
As warriors, as settlers, as explorers and traders, Vikings were agents of extraordinary social and political change, spurring global economic growth and the fortification of Europe, the development of national identities, advances in shipbuilding, navigation, and more. Their brutal raids gave Vikings an enduring reputation as barbarians. But in their quest for opportunity, for riches and control, the Vikings didn't destroy Western civilization. They enriched it, perhaps for all time.